Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this BRUK webinar. I'm Susan Mickey. I'm co-director of BRUK and also director of the Centre for Behaviour Change at UCL, and delighted to chair this second webinar in a series of two that are introducing the research that the core BRUK team will be doing over the next 3 years. We had on the 16th of February the first of the two webinars, which was Behaviour Change for Health, Environment and Safer Communities. And this was held in February. And this is available to watch on the BRUK webinar site. So do have a look at that one. So if first of all, I just do a bit of housekeeping here. Today's Building Behavioural Research Capacity and Methods. It will be recorded. It will be publicly available after the event, and the Q&A box won't be visible, but your name may be included when questions are read out. So do put your name in if you'd like that, or you can submit them anonymously. And we've not got AI note takers in the webinar. Okay, so we've got about an hour together, please do throughout submit any questions or comments indeed that you have via the Q&A box, and do use the upvote so that if we've got quite a few, we can start with those that are most popular. And if you require closed captioning but can't see this on your screen automatically, please click the CC box on your Zoom menu bar. Okay, before I introduce today's speakers, let me say just something about the today's presentations. What these will be is a very high-level overview of the different research projects, and more information can be found on them on the BRUK website and by following links that will be given to protocols and OSF, Open Science Framework pages, on some of the projects, and those will be put in the chat. So keep an eye on the chat for useful links. And the work and outputs will be disseminated through a lot of reports, webinars, articles, but keep in touch through newsletters, mailing lists, and social media. And we've also got quite a large body of projects that have been commissioned by us, and we'll have another webinar in a few months once those projects have become established to present those to you. So welcome to today's webinar, and I'm delighted to introduce the following speakers. We have Jules Alejandra, who's a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of Edinburgh. We have Professor Pedro Bordalo, Professor of Financial Economics from the University of Oxford, who had a clash and so sent a video, which unfortunately we can't make work on the Zoom, but we will embed it in the slides following the webinar. And the following speaker will just summarise in a couple of sentences what was in the webinar. Professor Lucy Byrne-Davis is Professor of Health Psychology at the University of Manchester. Dr. Nia Coop, Postdoctoral Research Fellow, also from Manchester. Scott Dickinson, Research Fellow from UCL and LSE, and Professor Thomas Webb, who's Professor of Psychology from the University of Sheffield. Okay, so this is roughly our time scale. We have about 10 minutes max for each of the different presentations, and then there'll be quarter of an hour questions and answers at the close. So without any further ado, Nia, over to you.
Thanks, Susan. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Nia, and I'm presenting this morning on the capability building work, which I co-lead with Professor Joe Hart at the University of Manchester, with support from Dr. Maggie Yang and a range of other research fellows from BRUK. So this work package is directly looking at how we can support and develop behavioural research capabilities. And so it aligns really closely with the overarching mission of BRUK. We know behavioural research is a rapidly growing field across sectors, and we know there's lots of behavioural research happening, but we don't necessarily, or we didn't at the beginning know who is doing what and where. And so we need to know this to be effective in building the capability of behavioural research. So the initial aim over the first sort of 18 months of this work package was to scope out the landscape so we could describe the field across all 4 UK nations and help us identify the strengths and the needs and the priorities. So this first slide was the kind of first aim of the first kind of a way of trying to answer the where question. So we have developed this behavioural research map, and this is available on the website, and it's interactive. The image on the right hand side is the map itself, and you can see there's 3 different icons. So they represent academic, private and third sector organisations, and you can filter by these. But so we had almost 900 entries at the end of 2024, and this represented almost 700 organisations across the UK. And you can see from both figures that there's a real concentration of behavioural research happening in Greater London, and also a kind of higher proportion of those happening within private sector organisations. This map is still available to, you can still add yourselves onto here or you can nominate organisations via the website. Next slide, thank you. So we answered the kind of where, and then we have a serious sort of body of work that helped us really identify the kind of what and how and who of behavioural research that was happening. So we had a documentary review, which was led by Dr. Neve Hart at Edinburgh, and she looked at synthesising the current and future needs of UK behavioural research from 34 strategies that had been published by or for national and devolved governments and research funders. We also ran a cross-sector survey, so we had 657 respondents in the first wave, and we're looking to redo this again in the future. And this had representation across all UK nations and across sectors. We also had a kind of partner survey with one of our partner organisations, Zinc, so they look specifically at startups and scale-ups or behavioural researchers within those organisations. And then we also completed 5 online sector-specific workshops. So these were led by Dr. Kitty Saunders and Dr. Maggie Yang at UCL. And they were really looking at a bit more in depth about what came out of the surveys and trying to explore kind of some of those challenges and how we might overcome those. So obviously there's a huge body of work. Each of those have their own published protocols. The review is available online, and the survey and the workshops are both currently under review. But we've pulled all that together into a report to give kind of high-level findings, sort of synthesize those findings, which the QR code should take you to. And I've just pulled out kind of 3 key sort of headlines from that work. So in terms of the topics that people felt were priorities for behavioural research, these were kind of climate and health related behaviours. Obviously, they were quite diverse within that area, but they all there's a big focus on this kind of planetary and population health. Also, lots of suggestions around our need to advance research methodology. So this included things like how we advance our theories and frameworks we use in behavioural research, and also things like how we can better represent the public voice and engage seldom heard communities, which Jules will be speaking about a little bit later. And then we've given artificial intelligence its own circle, so it sort of fits both within the topic area, but also within the methodology. And really, this was very strong in terms of the number of times it was mentioned in the survey, and people really talking about how we need to mitigate and understand the risks of AI, but also how we can harness it to further advance behavioural research. And then finally, there was a really strong message about needing to build behavioural research into broader leadership training, really to ensure that behavioural research is championed at those senior leadership levels. Thank you. Next slide. So I'm just going to run through a couple of things that we've done since that. So we have some learning and training resources on our website. So we have a resource repository, which essentially signposts to existing tools and training and recommended reading. There is a link and a QR code there if there are any resources that you think are missing from there. You're welcome to nominate them. And colleagues in BRUK have also been developing an AI repository. So as I said, it came out really strongly in the work that we did in the scoping work. Also, we've had a range of AI webinars that have had high numbers of attendance, and we've had a lot of user feedback. So this AI repository is being regularly updated. We're developing an AI statement. There's also a current AI in behavioural research survey that's available via that QR code as well, if you'd like to complete that. Thank you. Next slide. So another way we're looking to support, build capabilities to support more interdisciplinary working through providing space for kind of networking and collaboration. So at the end of last year, we launched our first regional network at the University of Manchester. We launched it with a kind of half-day in-person event at which we had 46 attendees across 2/3 of the division. So we had quite good representation across the university. And we currently have about 63 members on our Teams space that we've set up for this group. The word cloud, you can see there that we asked people on the day to tell us what the kind of area of expertise was, or the kind of area of focus of research. So you can see there's a strong health behaviour change amount of work going on, but also organisational, decision making, and communication. So on the day, the purpose of coming together really was to make sure we kind of co-developed the aims of the network to make sure it was useful and usable for everybody. So there was three kind of main things that came out of that. So one was around creating a collaborative hub that connects behavioural researchers across faculties. We're a really big university at Manchester, really got good opportunity to get people together. And we had feedback that a lot of people hadn't met each other before. So I think that really shows that value of the network. People also wanted opportunity to share expertise, helpful materials, support and advice between colleagues. So we set up the Teams channel for that. People also wanted to be sort of have signposting to learning and training opportunities. So we know there's lots of pockets of things happening within disciplines, but they are relevant across those disciplines. So we're trying to share amongst ourselves, as well as funding opportunities. So we are just developing some guidance to help other regional networks to launch as well. So we'll be putting those on the website soon. Thank you. Next slide. So the last couple of slides really are just about a couple of pieces of current work we're doing. So this first one is a behavioural research training scoping review. So obviously the overall aim of BRUK and this work package is around capability building. So it's important for us to know what's already being provided. And so the aim of this really is to map out the behavioural research training in the UK, identify gaps, and then help us think about planning future capability development opportunities. So this is led by Dr. Maggie Yang. It's an AI-assisted scoping review, and the protocol is available on OSF. And you can see on that figure on the right where the AI sort of sits within that process. And then last slide, please. And the last one is at very early stages. The protocol is not yet available, but this is looking at the funding landscape review. So obviously this is important given the financial environment is really key to enable us to do the work we need to do, and given recent announcements. So we're looking to do this through both a research portfolio analysis and a survey and bring those together. And the protocol will be on OSF soon. So we've given you a bit of an overview of a whistle-stop tour of what we've done already, what we're doing at the moment. So we'd really like to invite you to tell us what you'd like to see next, or anything that you think is missing, or invite any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nia. And all the speakers will be available for questions at the end. But we'll go straight on now to Jules Alexander, who's going to talk about engagement and involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everybody. So today I will present our plans for a study on how UK policymakers perceive and understand the public during public health emergencies. Next slide, please. So this work sits within BRUK's work package on engagement and involvement, led by Professor Oliver Escobar, who is joining us today, Professor Anne Phoenix, and Professor Linda Bald. Next slide, please. So I would like to start the presentation by defining public health emergency. So public health emergency is defined by UK's Health Security Agency as incidents that threaten serious damage to human welfare and require coordinated all-hazards response. So the integrated emergency management model on your right-hand side highlights a systematic approach to health emergency. So at the center of the model is a set of criteria that are needed to support emergency preparedness and recovery measures illustrated at the outer circle of the diagram. So we believe that within this criteria and phases, the public is at the center of public health emergency measures, and the perceptions about the public could influence policy measures, governance structures, guidance, procedures, and standards. Next slide, please. So in this study, we consider different types of public health emergencies, such as infectious disease outbreaks, climate-related events, geophysical events, CBRN threats, intentional man-made hazards and conflicts, as well as infrastructure incidents. So considering the different types of public health emergency matters because different emergencies could evoke different assumptions about public behavior. Next slide, please. So over the last decade, the UK has experienced different types of overlapping public health emergencies. So from climate-related events such as heat waves to infrastructure incidents such as the Grenfell Tower fire, infectious disease outbreaks such as COVID-19, CBRN threats such as Novichok poisoning in Salisbury, and intentional man-made threats such as the Manchester Arena bombing. So this illustrates that public health emergencies are not rare disruptions, but recurring governance challenges, and each event offers insights into how policymakers conceptualize public behavior. Next slide. So emergencies can make visible how the public is perceived in governance and decision making. So for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were competing views about the public that emerged, such as a united and responsible public who were adhering to COVID-19 measures and a freedom-loving public that is resistant to restrictions. So with these views, decision makers and public health officials use command and control approaches to motivate the public to adhere to public health emergency measures, and hesitant groups were framed as misinformed, and public hesitancy was dismissed as ignorance rather than a signal on the need for meaningful public engagement. Next slide, please. Criticisms on the public health emergency governance in the UK during COVID-19 pandemic also suggest that decisions were centralized around authoritative figures. There were also narratives suggesting that there's one rule for them and another rule for us. So alongside deficit-based narratives about the public's behavioral capacity. And some decision makers also believe that the public could exploit support measures during COVID-19 pandemic, and there were also instances where threat-based messaging was used to motivate compliance to COVID-19 measures. Next slide, please. There were also pockets of meaningful public engagement. Mutual aid groups enabled through horizontal organizing used community knowledge to build strong relationships with volunteer organizations. Local community champions also enabled involvement of community members, trust building, and clear communication to overcome misinformation about COVID-19 and barriers to vaccination. Shared social identity, or the belief that we are all in this together, also helps strengthen adherence to COVID-19 measure. Next slide, please. Assumptions about the public during public health emergencies in other contexts have also shown how it shaped governance and communication measures. In West Africa, for example, community-led outreach and co-designed interventions were central to Ebola control, and these measures, as well as a strong trust in local health workers, improved uptake of protective behaviors. Next slide, please. During H1N1 epidemic in the US, high quality communication and openness about uncertainty improved trust in government and public officials, which helped reinforce support in vaccination. So this only shows that policymakers' perception about the public can constrain the integration of behavioral and social science evidence for effective public health emergency response, which makes it important to ask, how do policymakers' perceptions about the public shape the UK's response to public health emergencies? Next slide, please. Thus, our aim is to explore how UK policymakers understand the public during public health emergencies. So specifically, we would like to explore how do they think about the public's ability to adhere to public health emergency measures, and how do these perceptions shape approaches to trust building, public engagement, and public health emergency response and decision making. Next slide. So we break down our general question to more specific questions to achieve our research objectives. So for objective 1, we would like to know how policymakers conceptualize public behavior, particularly their coping capacity and adherence. Do they differentiate between different publics, and what political ideology, behavioral advice, institutional culture, or influential actors inform these conceptions? Next slide, please. So for objective 2, we will explore policymakers' understanding of the public and how it shapes what policies are implemented or rejected. So for example, if non-adherence is interpreted as willful defiance rather than structural constraint, responses may prioritize enforcement or over providing support. Next slide. We will also explore how these perceptions about the public influence public engagement strategies. So what information is shared, how it is framed, and what are withheld. We also examine whether engagement is prioritized as core governance practice and to what extent. Next slide, please. Finally, we ask whether previous emergencies have altered policymakers' understanding of the publics and if their assumptions about the public change over time, and whether there are institutional learnings about how publics are viewed. Next slide. So this is an exploratory qualitative study using, just keep on pressing the button, please. So this is an exploratory qualitative study using reflective thematic analysis. So we are interviewing 10 to 15 policymakers, special policy advisors, and senior civil servants and officials directly involved in public health emergency response in the UK. We are using purposive and snowball sampling through our networks in BR UK. Interviews are semi-structured and focus on how policymakers conceptualize public behavior and how this influences public health emergency governance, policymaking, and public engagement. So our analysis will combine thematic coding and narrative analysis to capture both themes and lived perspectives of the people we are going to interview. Next slide, please. So we believe that
you've got to stop fairly soon, Jules, I'm afraid.
Yeah, this is the last slide.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we believe that this study has academic and societal contributions by identifying how public framing influence policymaking, governance, communication, and public engagement. This study also expands the analytical focus to include decision makers instead of examining public behavior. It also provides an in-depth examination whether assumptions about the public recognize public diversity, and it also compares framings across UK and devolved contexts. Next slide, please. So that is all about our study for engagement and involvement. And I thank you for listening, and we welcome your reflections and questions towards the Q&A section of the webinar.
Thank you, Jules. Really important work, and sorry to hurry you up. I'm just trying to keep everybody to time so that there is enough time for Q&As from the people who've joined us today. So very happy to hand over now to Tom Webb, Professor Tom Webb, who will talk about methods and evidence synthesis. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Susan. Morning, everybody. So yeah, I'm part of the team that's working on the methods and evidence synthesis within BR UK. And the overarching aim of our work is to support robust decision making based on sound behavioural science methods. And what I want to do today in this short period of time is to talk you through two of the questions that we're investigating. So I'm going to tell you about some work that we're doing here in Sheffield to investigate how people provide and receive information on the effectiveness of behavioural interventions. And then I'm going to hand over to Scott Dickinson, who's going to tell you about some work that they're doing at UCL to develop paradigms for investigating causality in behavioural research. So the first question is really primarily intended to improve the practical utility of findings in behavioural research. And we think that one of the key steps to achieving this is to understand how do people assess which interventions are effective. How do people make sense of the behavioural science that's being conducted in the UK and elsewhere? The next slide, please. So if you imagine that you're a policymaker, maybe actually you are a policymaker or a campaigner tasked with tackling a problem that's at least partly underpinned by behaviour. So for example, motorists are repeatedly exceeding a speed limit outside a school and parents have voiced concerns. And you might be aware of research, or maybe you start to look into some of the research, you check some briefs, some reports and some publications to try and identify some potential interventions. What kind of things does behavioural science suggest might be effective in tackling this problem? And you're likely to encounter a range of different approaches, things like, providing education on the risks of speeding, adding warning signs, speed humps, and so on. How do you assess which of those is going to work? And how do you assess what outcomes you might expect as a result of those interventions? So you might consult peer-reviewed evidence, so systematic reviews that evaluate the effectiveness of interventions. But are people sufficiently well equipped to understand potentially complicated statistics? Effect sizes, p-values, f-values, ANOVAs. Is there something that scientists and researchers could do better in order to help you? Or indeed, if you are a scientist or researcher, is there a better way to get across the important information to those who might be hopefully going to make use of it? So next slide, please. So that's what our research is going to look at. We're going to investigate these questions by interviewing people who use behavioural research, so representatives of business, policymakers, and so on, as well as those who do the research and are trying to communicate that evidence. We're going to focus initially on two contexts: reducing speeding among motorists and reducing meat consumption. And we're going to try and understand how researchers, practitioners, and policymakers currently provide and receive information on the effectiveness of interventions. And we're going to also ask our participants for thoughts on how we might improve communications, and something that we're already exploring potential options that could be tested in future work. So there's a link there to our protocol, which we've just published on the Open Science Framework, and also an email address for the research that's leading this work in Sheffield, Dr. Dan Thorman. So thanks very much. I'll hand over to Scott Dickinson.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Scott Dickinson. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at UCL and LSE. I work with Dave Lagnado at University College London and Amy Roger at the University of Edinburgh. And our project is on developing experimental paradigms with AI for investigating causality in behavioral research. Next slide, please. Okay, so we often want to study behavior in settings we can't control. For example, you might want to study how information affects decision-making in gambling, but you can't typically control features of the setting. People typically gamble on sports events. You can't control sports events. So how can you study how people form and update their beliefs in real-world settings when you can't control it? We propose we can use artificial intelligence with experiments to simulate and manipulate real-world events to study behavior. So give an AI a lot of information, a lot of data, ask it to simulate some real-world events, manipulate something about these events, and then study behavior with an experiment. That's kind of the idea of the project. Next slide, please. So we have a specific application to gambling. It's about 1 in 5 people in the UK engage in gambling, and many people actually suffer adverse financial, social, or health consequences. Now, you can't typically run a standard experiment for practical or ethical reasons. As I said before, for example, you can't go to a football match and change features of the football match. That's illegal. It's called match fixing. So what do you do instead? Well, we propose, and we've got a kind of project now working on this, on simulating realistic gambling environments using artificial intelligence. So we have a lot of data on football. We give it to the AI. We ask it to understand the relationships between the variables, simulate some realistic text commentary, probabilities, and gambling odds. And we're going to use that to study how people make decisions. Cool. Next slide, please. Great. We've got a specific application to in-game multis, or in-game gambling on multiple events. What are those? Well, you can see on the right here, a specific in-game multi. There's somebody's bet on Manchester City to win, there to be 3 or more goals in the match, and for both teams to score. These are very popular bets. People seem to lose a lot more money than on these bets on average, and they typically bet on these causally linked events. For example, a player taking a number of shots in a match causes a team to be more likely to score a goal, which causes them to be more likely to win the match. And we think that people have very good intuition for the causality underlying this, the relationship in football, but people are very bad at evaluating the actual probabilities. So we think that people base their bets on narratives rather than accurate probabilities. Cool. Next slide. We've got just to say, we've actually got a pilot almost ready to run, trying to disentangle this relationship. Are they really gambling on these narratives, or do they really understand the probabilities, what's going on a bit deeper? In terms of the implications of our work, well, we think we can provide a better understanding of gambling behavior, and specifically, we could probably provide policy recommendations to address gambling harms. We can really get at what is happening, how people are forming and updating their beliefs with these kind of causally related events. But our innovation is to introduce this new novel methodology to simulate real-world events using AI, and then using that subsequently in an experiment to study behavior. And we think it could be used well beyond sports. You could use it in finance, where you may create financial trading data and study how people make financial decisions, or in law, you may simulate some kind of court case, for example. It's very exciting possibilities. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, we don't have a QR code at the moment and no protocols yet, but that's coming very soon. If you'd like to learn more or reach out and have any more discussions about this, feel free to contact us using our email addresses here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom and Scott. Okay, moving on. I'm now going to hand over to Lucy Byrne-Davis, who's going to talk to the work they're doing in the area of organisation, markets and economy. Lucy.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Pedro Bordalo and our other colleagues listed on this slide here. Next slide, please. So this theme is both about behaviour in organisations that influence markets and the economy, and also about how organisations research behaviour. I'm going to introduce the work we're doing in answering the first of these research questions. And as Susan said, unfortunately, Pedro can't be with us today. And the video of his presentation will be available after the webinar. So we're interested in how organisations can and do embed behavioural research that benefits them and contributes to scientific knowledge, and also how we can understand heterogeneity in behavioural responses to incentives and information in work, financial and economic contexts. Next slide, please. So the rationale for studying the first of these is that research in organisations often explain behaviour, but it less often tests interventions to change that behaviour. Most organisations are interested in the behaviour of their employees and their clients. For example, hospitals might want to save money, contribute to sustainability by stopping health professionals using certain disposable products. Private companies might want their executives to adopt good management practices so that they get productivity out of their teams, and so on and so forth. And with this increasing profile of behavioural research and increasing awareness of it, many organisations are using experts, either people who they're employing in small units or consultants, to understand these behaviours and to change them. If we think about what's happening in academic behavioural research at the moment, scientists are always trying to understand human behaviour and how to change it. This is driven by scientific curiosity, but also by wanting to have a positive impact from research. And there is a real synergy between these two. And organisations and scientists that are using that synergy are adding value to both the scientific pursuit, because they're able to conduct studies in organisations, and the goals of those organisations who are having high quality behavioural research conducted to help them understand and influence change. But other people are finding that really challenging, so that embedding of behavioural research seems to be quite challenging, particularly high quality, robust studies of behaviour change. So whilst studying behaviour and how it arises is really important, we can only really understand, or we can best understand, how to intervene to change behaviour by studying behavioural change interventions. Some of these examples actually do exist. Both of these examples are in the health context because that's where I work. Learning health systems, which are healthcare systems that are designed to continuously improve using data that's collected, that's high quality, analysing it and feeding back insights in real time. And a kind of very specific example of that would be an implementation laboratory, which is where for example, certain behaviours are audited and then fed back using implementation strategies in real time, in real world practice. Next slide, please. So our work in this part of BRUK is we're looking at understanding that embedded behavioural research, starting with scoping review, moving on to case studies, then semi-structured interviews, and then development of tools and recommendations. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So we are looking at studies of embedded behavioural research trials in health organisations and non-health organisations. So we're describing really what randomised studies have been done, and we are going to extract, or we are extracting, the methodological approaches that have been used, and we are looking specifically at high quality studies, so just randomised controlled trials in these scoping reviews, and we're operationalising embeddedness by looking at co-authors papers that include co-authors from the organisations, and the interventions that build on the usual work of the organisation. So we're documenting the methods that they use, the way they measure behaviour, methods of random allocation, statistical analyses, assessments of behavioural influences, and so on. Next slide, please. At the same time, we're looking at case studies where the unit of analysis is an organisation itself, specifically health or non-health organisations that have conducted or commissioned high quality behavioural intervention research. And we're going to look at how behavioural research is implemented within these systems, 3 to 4 organisations, 3 to 4 case studies from health contexts and from non-health contexts across public, private and third sector organisations. We are using semi-structured interviews and documentary analyses. The semi-structured interviews are with key stakeholders who are involved in either design, commissioning or implementation of behavioural intervention research within their organisations. And the documentary analysis are things like protocol strategy documents and evaluations to really understand how behavioural intervention research is embedded in those practices. We're using normalisation process theory and also the theoretical domains framework to explore the influences on the behaviours that allow people to embed behavioural research. Next slide, please. In study 3, we're going to look at facilitators and barriers to doing this kind of behavioural intervention research with behavioural researchers working within organisations. And then our final study will bring all of those findings together from studies 1, 2 and 3 to really develop a set of practical tools for organisations who want to do this kind of behavioural intervention research. This will be done with stakeholder involvement so that we end up with some tools that are evidence informed but also acceptable and feasible in organisations. So the overall goal really is to move from understanding behavioural research to producing something that organisations can use to support embedding high quality behavioural research. Next slide, please. Pedro's talk really looks at how incentives and information as ways of influencing behaviours in organisations are influenced by the context in which people receive them, and so there are different ways of reacting to them and really studying their mental states using large-scale surveys.
Hello, this is Pedro Bordalo, continuing on the organizations, markets, and economy theme. So if you are a policymaker and you want to shape some behavior, you typically have 2 levers at your disposal. You can provide incentives, like traffic fines to make sure people drive responsibly, or you can provide information, like, for example, a public health campaign to improve a healthy behavior. Consider, for example, what happens if you talk about the risks of being unvaccinated. What is the behavior that follows? Well, on the one hand, you might see increased take-up by some people, but by other people, you might see instead neglect of the message, even a backlash against this information, or overreaction. This illustrates a well-documented problem, which is that behavior is hard to predict and can also be suboptimal given the information you've given people. What is the way forward? Well, one way forward is to understand what is top of mind behind these behaviors. So backlash might reflect a focus on the risk of vaccines given the information. Neglect might reflect an idea that risks are small, and overreaction might reflect the fact that information brings fear to the top of mind. So what's the research question that we are proposing is to ask what gets to the top of mind? What are people thinking about? And does what's top of mind drive behavior? So our goal is to integrate cognitive science, understanding what gets to the top of mind, with economic analysis to develop a framework to integrate these 2 sciences and develop novel measurement methods to measure the features that people have in mind and how they drive behavior. The payoff of doing so is that it will allow us to measure and predict and even shape what actually comes top of mind when people are making decisions, and that can help design successful policy as well as innovation. Let me give you an example. This is a survey with a national bank where we asked people, what do you think inflation will be in the next 12 months? And could you justify your answer? And we saw that people were very heterogeneous. People with low expectations of inflation focused on news and economic logic. People with very high expectations focused on personal experiences and emotion. Next, we changed the context. We changed what's top of mind. We asked people to tell us about an adversity that they have experienced. This is a personal experience which has nothing to do with inflation itself. However, what it did do is that it changed how people thought about inflation. They started becoming focused on more personal experiences of inflation and displaying more negative emotion, and therefore becoming much more pessimistic about inflation itself. So what does this tell us? This tells us that beliefs and choices rely on mental states, and mental states are shaped by context, including information and memory. We are developing methods to identify what's top of mind using both theory and artificial intelligence. And the takeaway is that if you want to change behavior, you should change context and not just information. If you have questions or have suggestions, please do get in touch. Thank you.
Reminder to everybody, use the Q&A box for putting any questions. We've got a couple already. We're going to start with 3 that actually were submitted before the webinar. So the first is, what is the panel's view on the potential value of a BRUK behavioural science curriculum to support capability building at scale? Maybe if we could start with Lucy, and then if Nia, you wanted to add to that one, that would be great.
I think this is a really interesting question. And I think coming back to answering the question as a behavioural scientist, my first question would be, what is a curriculum? So is a curriculum education, which often focuses on development of knowledge and skills, which are obviously really important. But we know as behavioural researchers that knowledge and skills are not the only thing that influence behaviour. So if we're interested in changing people's behaviour so that they do behavioural research or use behavioural research, then we also need to consider context in which that curriculum might land. So basically people's opportunities and motivations to understand and use behavioural research. So I think it's probably a broader question than intended learning outcomes and a curriculum that we might use, but actually really trying to understand the context in which people might use that curriculum to conduct or understand behavioural research. Interestingly, the WHO's unit has actually done some work on that, scoping people's needs to be able to conduct behavioural research. And so I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at, whoever asked that question.
Thanks. Nia, did you want to add to that?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm just going to refer back to the training scoping review. And I think one of the things that we're going to be pulling out of that is what are the kind of core components of all the different types of training. So that will sort of start to point us in the direction of what we think, or kind of, I guess, maybe fits with what we think a curriculum might be. And the other point I was thinking is related to this is conversation we've had in the background about the fact that there's no sort of core competencies for people who are calling themselves behavioural scientists. And I think that's a kind of a challenge and a conversation that we continue to have, given that there are different requirements for different disciplines because we're such an interdisciplinary group of people doing behavioural science.
Thanks. And also to say that the BRUK website has got a list of current training courses in behavioural science and behaviour change. So for people at different levels, from people who have no familiarity to people who have a lot of experience and expertise. So please do go and look at that. And obviously, if having seen and experienced what's already available, you think BRUK could contribute in terms of developing capability, there's an email, and you just use the general email and it will go to the right people, and we can take that on board. So do engage with us, do let us know as we go forward over these next 3 years. Second question that was submitted in advance was, how can behavioural science and AI come together to contribute to your fields of research, i.e. behaviour change research or behavioural research? Could this be a problem? I've been involved in more than one collaboration between behavioural researchers and computer scientists, both successful to varying degrees. In terms of the problem, I'd say the first thing that's really important is to allow for time to understand each other's, not only each other's language, but also each other's ways of thinking. So, for example, computer scientists don't tend to work with advanced protocols. It's much more try this, try that as they go. And so I think that's an important part of, obviously, interdisciplinary collaboration in general, but especially with AI and behavioural science. And I led for 5 years and now have another 5 years funding the Human Behaviour Change Project, which is a collaboration between computer science and behavioural science, and looking at how we can use AI to find relevant information, to integrate evidence with all the kind of precision and detail that's needed to answer the kind of complicated questions that we've been hearing about. The fact that behaviours change and influences on behaviour are different in different contexts. So there's many ways. There's both helping with evidence synthesis, but also about predicting from what we know to what we don't know, to novel scenarios, which is often what policymakers, practitioners, planners want to know. You know, what is likely to be effective for this particular population in this particular setting, potentially for these outcomes. And, you know, often there's no direct evidence, so one needs to extrapolate from what we know. And prediction is very different than meta-analyses, which is summarising what we know. This is about predicting new scenarios. So on the Human Behaviour Change Project website, there's a prediction tool based on AI, which is a good example of that collaboration. So I hope that's enough for whoever asked the question. And thirdly, before we go on to the live questions, and do keep them coming, how can I include experimentation and testing in my work as a comms officer? How can I build my research capability in this, which is about experimental testing? So who would like to start off with that? Tom.
Well, I just wanted to come in and thank the person for asking this question. I think it's great that somebody's asking this question, particularly as Lucy pointed out, so much of the work that goes on in organisations is focused on predicting behaviour rather than actually testing what works. So I think it's great that you're starting to think about this question. My quick answer, I'm going to hand over to Lucy. I'm sure she's got a better answer than me. My quick answer would be to look for opportunities to do quasi-experimental tests. So, you know, obviously random allocation is a big ask and usually unfeasible within organizations, but there may be opportunities for you to compare one thing against another, be it let's try one thing for a month and then try something else for a month. Let's compare this group of people, maybe it's people on floor 3 who get one thing against people on floor 4 and they get something else. So just looking for those opportunities to do that sort of testing in a, I'm not saying say informal way, but in a quasi-experimental way, which can be a starting point for working out what works. But I'll hand back to Lucy because I know your presentation was involved a lot of this.
I would just say that it's really, really important. And like Tom said, it's brilliant that people are thinking about this, and we are seeing more of this coming through, and there are organisations who have been able to do it. So hopefully the findings of our work will really help with this. And if you are interested, if you're listening and you're interested, then do please get in touch.
Thanks. And before I go to the couple of live questions we have, Jules, a question for you, because I cut you off and you had to speak very quickly towards the end. And it's such important work. And one of the issues you pointed to was about the perception of different groups in the public and the implications of this for being able to develop interventions that are and policies that are likely to be adhered to by these different groups, who will have very different experiences, very different contexts that they're living in, very different mindsets and emotional responses to things. And we saw this a lot during COVID. I was involved in the behavioural science group advising the government. And one of the things we said time and time again, it's so important to understand the differences between different groups within a population and really listen to them and consult them. and ensure that there's co-design so that those people with the lived experience are able to help develop those policies and interventions, not only because they're more likely to be appropriate and therefore effective, but also the whole process gets buy-in and therefore more engagement and therefore, more likely to be successful. Unfortunately, the government didn't listen quite as much as we'd have liked. And so I suppose my question is, how do we really encourage policymakers and those who are taking decisions at a government level to really be interested in this question? So I suppose if we're thinking about changing their behaviour, how can we change their capability, motivation, opportunity to be interested in the importance of different groups in the general public?
Yeah, thank you for that great question, Susan. I think hopefully after we do the interviews with them, we can hopefully devise much more advice on how can policymakers engage more with the public. But I think one of the things that we think about is asking what it is for the policymakers that would make them engage with the questions that we were trying to explore. So what would they get from engaging with us or exploring how they're perceiving or conceptualizing the public, not just during COVID-19, but in other emergency or public health emergencies in the UK? So what can they get from this kind of work? So specifically, what are the processes that they've been doing during the COVID-19 pandemic that enable them to choose a policy intervention or a measure that they implemented, and did they actually think about the different public during that time? So I think that the key thing that we need to ask policymakers is how important it is for them and what it is that they're going to get from engaging with us or understanding the public more. But I think Oliver, as one of the co-leads of this project, might have something to add as well.
Thanks. Yes, Oliver, please.
Thanks, Jules. I mean, part of what we are hoping to do with this is to signal as well. The point that Susan made about the different incentives and what might change the architecture of incentives for policymakers to take up engagement and behavioral research as key insights that shape how they act is not just a function of how policymakers feel about these things. It's also a function of whether they feel that the public expects that from them. So it's this two-way relationship that we are also interested in, which is why in the work package for in BR UK, we are focusing on engagement and involvement to strengthen engagement as a function of behavioral research, because the more the broader public expects policymakers to engage the public, the more incentives they will have to do so, if that makes sense. So it's a bit of a, but at this stage with this project, what we're trying to really be quite precise about is the influence that certain images or imaginings of the public have in how then policymakers navigate the tensions between the choices they need to make and the different pressures and insights that they have. Because again, research and public input is only one of a number of things that will shape their actions. So we're trying to make sense of it, but we hope we'll have more to say once the research is completed.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a couple of questions asked live. One is from, and sorry if I mispronounced your name, Thana Assad. My background is digital communications and social media. I'm interested in specialising in public health campaigns. Are there any research or projects I can contribute to helping using my skills? For example, PPI, patient and public involvement. Please do, Thana, and anyone else interested, contact BR UK on the website by email and summarise what your expertise is and what you'd be interested in. And then that can be circulated to all the relevant projects, both the ones that you've been hearing about at the last webinar and this webinar, but also our commissioned research projects, because BR UK is very committed to a two-way interaction between research leadership, but also shaping our activities and engaging a whole range of researchers and research users who are interested in behavioural research. So invitation to you and anyone else on the call. Then the second one is saying, based on our experience and expertise, there's a real need for behavioural analysis competencies. So that is, I understand that to be analysing problems in terms of behaviour, which I think is really important that you've drawn attention to that, because once one's understood where human behaviour lies in relation to any kind of problem we're trying to address, then one is able to bring on board a whole range of evidence and theories and tools that can help in addressing that. So thank you for raising that. And the examples you give are the rural economy and food systems, value chain analysis, which I'm not familiar with, and then more broadly, geopolitics. So I would hand this over to everybody on the panel to have a think about this. But I can start off by a particular project I was involved in called a rather long title, Complex Urban Systems for Sustainability and Health. And the aim of this project, it was a very large 5-year project funded by the Wellcome Trust, was to bring about change at a citywide level that would improve health and sustainability. So identifying particular issues. And we had 6 case studies, 2 in Europe, 2 in Africa, and 2 in China. And I was the only behavioural scientist on what was a very, very large collaboration, as you can imagine. And so that was quite a challenge. But the way in which we managed to contribute, which did have long-lasting methodological advances, was through the systems work they were doing. So they were doing quite a lot of dynamic systems mapping of all the different things that were going on around any particular problem that had been identified. And when I first got involved, they were really interesting, kind of what's related to what, different types of influence, feedback loops, threshold effects, etc. But no mention of human behavior in it. And unless one identifies human behavior, then one just doesn't have the levers of change that we could have. So we then worked with people there to develop what we've called behavioural systems mapping. And I'm sure in the resources we have resources on that. Certainly Jo Hale, as she was there, and myself and others have published papers in relation to using this approach. For example, retrofitting the housing stock in Wales would be a UK example. If anybody's got access to the paper, do put it in, but otherwise I'm sure you can track it down or again email us. So that's one example from me in relation to this question. Any other thoughts from anyone else? If not, okay, Lucy.
Just jumping in with again that sort of global perspective. So we've done quite a lot of work with collaborators in low and middle income countries and some in the Middle East and Egypt. And I think what's really important for us always to remember is that a lot of the evidence that we've got and a lot of the theories that were generated are very Eurocentric and North American centric. And so it is about capability building with local expertise as well. So we're quite often asked to jump in as the behavioural scientist on that project, but we're aware of the fact that both the theories and the tools and methods that we're bringing are very other to which it might end up that they're exactly the same, but we can't assume that, I suppose. So collaboration, I think, across international borders is really important for behavioural scientists, as it is for everybody.
Thanks very much. And I think going back to Jules's point earlier, and also Tom's work looking at heterogeneity. How do we understand that heterogeneity? The importance of context. Whether it's globally or within the UK, is really incredibly important. You know, sitting on nice guideline development groups where we're trying to make evidence-based recommendations for disadvantaged inner city groups based on largely US data that has a very different health service apart from anything else is a big extrapolation. So I think whatever level, whether it's global or UK, that point is really valid. Well, thank you everybody for a very interesting discussion and presentations. And I just want to close by drawing your attention to what is in the chat so you can get the details of it. But the BR UK and Centre UB hosted conference that will be on the 30th of June in Birmingham. The abstract deadline's finished, so anybody who's submitted an abstract will hear before too long. And we have two excellent keynote speakers, Ralph Hertwig from the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin, and also Paul Taylor, who's the UK Government Chief Scientific Advisor for Policing and Chair of the Government Social and Behavioural Science for Emergencies. So I think what you've heard today and at our webinar previously in February is just a taste of the range of types of research you'll hear about at the conference, and hopefully get engaged in discussing and asking questions. So just to end with a thank you to all those who attended, and also to underline, anytime you want to get engaged in different ways that is possible, just use the email, let us know. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.